Fable III, the sequel to two critical and monetary successes, but the last mainline entry in a series that had been running for 6 years. When Lionhead was on such a streak, why did this cause that to break? Was this the beginning of the end for Fable, leading the series into a Kinect game, a cancelled project, and then radio silence? Fable 3 would make a lot of large, sweeping changes to the series, drastically disrupting its previous RPG elements and making some ambitious moves in the process. It would focus much more on the kingship aspect of being a hero, rather than the boots on ground that we were used to. Today, I'm going to delve deep into Fable 3 to see why this would be the last we would see of an attempt at the Fable that we knew and loved. I'm going to be taking a thorough look at its gameplay, story, and every mechanic I possibly can. I've already covered Fable 1 and 2, so if you haven't seen those videos, go check them out. This will be the last individual part of this series before the full retrospective, including the infamous end of the Fable series. I'm also going to keep with the trend of covering both my good and evil playthroughs, and Fable 3 had a bit more of an interesting narrative involved when it came to the evil playthrough. I'll be talking extensively about this game and comparing it to the others in the series, so spoiler warning for Fable 1, 2, and 3. Fable 3 was originally announced at Gamescom in 2009. This showed a cinematic trailer slowly zooming out on a crown and Teresa declaring that the race for that crown had begun. Fable 3 was developed again by Lionhead Studios. Peter Molyneux would return as designer, and most of the team stayed the same. Looking into promotion for the game and the development diaries gives us an insight into what the thesis for a game is. This is an integral part of critique because we can speculate all day, but having words straight from the mouths of the people that worked on the game is the best we can get. A lot of what Molyneux said about Fable 3 was based on wanting change and not wanting to be stagnant. If all the rules have been established, and all you offer is a new story and a handful of locations, people will start to lose interest. He also spoke on the inspiration for each game. If in Fable the inspiration was folklore, and in Fable 2 the inspiration was King Arthur and Robin Hood, then Fable 3 is definitely the rebels and monarchs, both modern day and historic. It's clear from these talks that Molyneux wanted to do something interesting with the game, move toward more of a ruling mindset for the main hero rather than one fighting in the woods. The development diary also focused quite a bit on extreme morphing, the new morphing system that would change your appearance with your morality.
We've totally looked at the morph system, thrown it all away and started again. And the first thing that we've got is something called extreme morphs. Now, these extreme morphs are on an expression.
This also extended into the weapons, morphing with your personality and the way that you use them. Throughout the development diary, it seems like Fable 3 took a turn. Molyneux himself says this.
It's such an exciting time. And you know why it's so exciting? It's because we're actually changing Fable 3. We're moving more towards the action-adventure and we're diminishing a little bit the RPG.
I can't ever be entirely sure if this was an afterthought throughout the development of the game, but it sure seemed like one. You'll see this change reflected quite a bit in the game itself, and was one of my largest critiques on my first playthrough. The other thing that's a huge change from the first two games is the exodus of menus from Fable 3. We'll talk about all of this in depth in a bit, trust me. But I think Molyneux crossed some sort of barrier between Fable 2 and 3. He just seems a little full of himself here, and I can't help but roll my eyes a little when he talks. The cast of Fable 3 has been majorly upgraded, adding Ben Kingsley, Michael Fassbender, John Cleese, Nicholas Hoult, Bernard Hill, Simon Pegg, and Stephen Fry returning. I mean, the cast is absolutely stacked, and it shows throughout the game. Lionhead also released a mobile game in conjunction with Fable III. It was called Kingmaker and was only available for a short period of time. It let the player go to locations and mark them on a shared map for their respective factions, Rebel or Royals. Doing this would earn you in-game gold and points for the faction. I couldn't find any footage of this game, and it definitely wasn't available to play anymore. I'm going to talk more about development in a bit, but let's get some more context and jump into the game. Fable 3 begins with me choosing my gender again. I looked into this, and really the only difference is some key NPC genders being switched, so I went with a prince for both of my playthroughs. We see an introductory cinematic which looks just as good as the previous games. I'm still impressed by these visuals for being over a decade old. Though I kind of hate this cinematic that starts the game off. It shows a chicken being chased throughout the city with Teresa narrating the scene.
Where those who dare to speak out are punished. And those who dare to hope find nothing to hope for.
He's eventually killed, and this is alluded to his uprising, the consequences of someone standing out from the pack. It's kind of odd, but also very Lionhead. Our hero is awoken from bed, a prince of the kingdom. His butler, Jasper, is getting him ready for his day. We have a choice between two outfits, one princely and formal, the other adventurous and casual. I chose the fab-looking one because I'm all about fashion, and I need something to attract the ladies. Lady Elise, my love interest, is waiting for me in the courtyard. I go to see her, and I choose to kiss her. She tells me there's an uprising, and everyone is upset with the king, my brother. Logan and I are sons of the hero of Bowerstone. After the end of Fable II, the hero of Bowerstone was able to unite Albion under one rule, with Bowerstone as its capital. This created an industrial revolution in Albion, with great progress in society, but even more progress in the poverty of production. This discontent, combined with the tyrannical nature of the current king's rule, is creating discord in the city. Lady Elise thinks that the king might have had a worker executed.
If you think it will help.
I do. They may fear the king, but they still care for their prince.
I take her hand and head into the castle, giving the crew an encouraging speech on my way. All of Fable 3's choices are presented in this way, much less subtle than Fable 2, a fiery bad boy option and a shining light good boy option. I want to say first and foremost that Fable 3 has had its aesthetics upgraded from the previous games. The team seems to have found their style with this entry, and has lost a lot of the annoying bloom from previous games. We're introduced to Walter, our trainer, and one of our best friends in the castle. He arms me and teaches me how to use Fable 3's combat system. Sword combat is incredibly similar to the previous game. Hit to attack, hold to block, hold in a direction to do a powerful flourish attack. Through the castle, we encounter a petitioner who wants our signature to eradicate poverty. I'm not exactly sure how he plans to do that or what we're signing, but I sign it anyways. As we're training with Walter, he begins to tell me something.
You only went and broke it. Look at that. Am I a great teacher or what? But listen, there's something...
Walter! You have to come quickly! Both of you!
But Lady Elise interrupts. She says there's a demonstration outside. Protesters have invaded the castle grounds. They clearly do not like the king and are starting to get rowdy. Walter goes to talk to Logan and says we have to have a conversation after. As Elise and I watch in on the meeting, we see Logan beating Walter for his transgressions. Logan wants to kill all of the protesters, turning them into an example. We burst in the room and Logan decides that since we want to make the decisions for the kingdom, we can.
Enough! How dare you turn against me? Perhaps you believe you should be the one making these decisions. You really wish to defend those traitors? Then so be it. Let us see how you do.
He forces us into the throne room and we're forced to decide. We can save the protesters, which number in the hundreds, or save Elise. This is a pretty tough decision this early in the game, since you're already kind of involved in this little love story. But you know that the right decision is to not let these people die. The game also only gives you so long to make the decision before Logan will make it for you. Fable III also introduces a voiced protagonist for the first time in the series. This pushes the game further towards a narrative-focused experience rather than a supplanting of oneself in the shoes of a role-playable character. I didn't hate this choice, and I think in the context of what this game becomes, it was probably a good one overall. The hero is in his room, Jasper trying to console him, frustrated at the outcome of the throne room choice.
I can't just stay here.
You're not. We leave the castle tonight. This kingdom needs nothing less than a revolution. It needs a new leader. It needs a hero.
He is dejected by his brother, betrayed by his only living family, his lover gone. Young wistful romance swept away in an instant to do something that felt justified. It's time to get out of here though, but before we can leave, Walter wants to pay respects to Albion's last hero, my father, the hero of Bowerstone. We find his tomb, his body overlooked by a kneeling angel. Walter tells us that this is our legacy, and at that moment, we take a guild seal from the hands of the statue. This transports me to another area, a misty, long road blocked by gates. Teresa is there. She tells us this long road is the path we are destined to take, and we must unlock the gates by gaining followers. Our first two friends, Jasper and Walter, are my closest allies. Walking through the gate sees us unlocking our first combat ability, the Fireball spell. Will has been changed to not just be an inherent power, but channeled through gauntlets. The magic system works much better in this game overall, but very similar to Fable II. You can hold spells to power them up and attack multiple enemies at once, or target one. You can also wield two separate spells at once, combining them into one powerful fusion. This is an interesting spin on the will system from previous games, and creates a nice variety of combinations, though this comes with a large downside, as all improvements in the Fable series do. With the large amount of spells included in the original Fable, the team pared them down in the sequel. They decided that this was obviously a move in the right direction, and pared them down again to only 6. Fireball, Shock, Blades, Vortex, Force Push, and Ice Storm. This is pretty ridiculous and removes a lot of choice from the game, especially with spells like Control Time and Raise Dead. Lionhead did decide to include these spells in the game in the form of potions, but this isn't nearly as useful considering these potions are finite. Journeying through the caverns with Walter and Jasper, we eventually arrive at a teleporter. This takes us to a sanctuary, my father's old sanctuary. This is the place he used to do his work from, and he left it to Jasper. Jasper decides to take full control over the rooms and help us in setting them up. I'll go in depth about the road to rule and the sanctuary in a bit, but for now, let's continue with the story. From the sanctuary, Walter and I fast travel to a dweller camp in Mistpeak. The dwellers are a nomadic people, extremely wary of outsiders. They normally call Mistpeak their home, but since Logan has been exploiting the area for resources, they've been forced to move into the coldest, most inhospitable regions of the mountain. With this in mind, speaking to their king, Sabine, he is incredibly wary of us. This is just the beginning of our quest across Albion, trying to gain followers not only to unlock the road to rule, but also to marshal a force large enough to overthrow Logan. The themes of this game are clearly that of rebellion, and it's interesting to see this play out in the Fable world, because we haven't really seen this type of story before now. Amassing these forces, though, will require us to convince various leaders across the lands that we are nothing like Logan. Sabine is our first roadblock. He has to be wary of outsiders. His people have been disgraced for years. They've had to change their ways of living, of surviving in the mountains, and he can't let that happen to his people again. He has a responsibility. Because of this, he has some tasks we must complete to prove ourselves.
This is easily done. There's a secret chamber beneath the town of Brightwall, built by your own father. Only heroes can survive its trials and reach the relics within. Bring me one of these ancient objects and I will believe you. Second, prove you are a warrior worthy of leading us into battle. You can do this by slaying the mercenaries who plague Mist Peak Valley and who have long soured our existence. Third, prove you are a true leader. Persuade our neighbors in Brightwall to share what food they have with us.
We head for Brightwall to begin taking care of these tasks. On our way, we get introduced to exploration in this game, which mostly consists of side paths that have a few dig spots and treasure chests. The dog finds them again for you, just like Fable 2. I think the dog has been improved in this game because they've backed off the importance just a little bit. The interactions are mostly the same though, play fetch, praise, or punish. Because it doesn't have this effect on the overall story, I'm not as worried about its implementation in this game though. He's allowed to just be my good boy this time around. On the way to Brightwall, we encounter a ton of random wolves that block our path. We still haven't been introduced to a sword of our own yet. The last one we got was broken in the fight with Walter, so we'll be reintroduced to sword combat later. We also haven't been introduced to ranged combat yet, so we're just left with our one measly fireball spell. I wouldn't really take umbrage with this if we didn't have to go so long without these other two forms of combat. It just results in us having to spam magic for the first hour and a half of the game, which makes the combat feel like a chore right off the bat. Once we get past these swarms of wolves, we arrive in Brightwall. The town was once a garrison, just a fort to hold soldiers. Now it's become a modestly sized village, gathering its prominence and economy from the surrounding farms and agriculture. It's grown, and now is the only town in Albion with its own university, Brightwall Academy, which happens to be our first destination. This academy is holding the secret chamber that my father kept. Samuel, the librarian, remarks that the academy has been closed by Logan, and the surrounding town is being outrageously taxed.
Sweet papyrus! A real visitor! By the holy bookmark! The guild seal!
We show him our guild seal to prove to him that he can show us to the chamber. We head deep into the reliquary and begin searching for the relic. We find some flit switches, callbacks to the last game, and we're introduced to melee and ranged combat. Before we talk about that, I'd like to talk about the Sanctuary, because that gets introduced around the same time. It's also quite a lot, so get ready for my big mechanic rant, because this is all intertwined. So, Fable 3 has no menus. Well, virtually no menus. Outside of a settings menu that can be accessed by pausing during a cutscene or in the Sanctuary itself, there is no pause menu. Hitting the pause button simply transports us to the Sanctuary. There, Jasper is waiting for us, and we have access to a mission table and 4 rooms. The mission table will let us look at our quest list, fast travel to different areas, or invest in property. In the same room, we can interact with our dog, accept gifts from our friends, look at our morality and settings. The weapons room displays all of our current melee, ranged, and will-powered weapons on the walls. We can switch through these, examine them, and equip new ones. The clothing room will show us all of our obtained outfits, tattoos, beards, dyes, and anything else cosmetic related. The gold room shows a visual representation of how much gold you have in your inventory. We can also see trophies on one wall and achievements on the other. The gold itself has a puzzle of sorts involved with it. There's a chest at the bottom that can't be unlocked without the key from the top of the room. You need to accumulate enough gold to climb the pile to the top, grab the key, and then unlock the chest. This chest isn't really worth a ton because it just gives you a random legendary weapon. The last room is basically the DLC and co-op room. You can connect with other players here and also buy any DLC that you'd like to purchase, which Jasper loves to remind you about over and over again through the course of the game.
If you're not too busy, you might have a look in the sanctuary.
Now, what was Lionhead going for here? Well, I can confidently tell you that this decision was probably entirely Molyneux's doing. He talks about it quite passionately in the development diaries, and it also just reeks of that Molyneux ambition. Listen, Dad, a lot of things in Fable 3 I don't like, but as is true with the entire series, I still respect the ambitious decisions that were made and the risks that were taken. Getting rid of 90% of the GUI and trying to turn it into a in-world thing, an entirely immersive experience, is a huge task and a ridiculously ambitious idea. But overall, I think it sacrifices practicality for aesthetics, which I can be in favor of in certain circumstances, but not in this one. It's a little annoying to have to pause, walk to another room, or teleport, only to have to walk up to the weapon I want to equip, shuffling through different racks, and then being able to equip it. It's just more time-consuming and annoying than anything else. We're now allowed to use all 3 combat specialties. Ranged works similarly to the previous games, except they've added a flourish to ranged, which is genuinely just a through and through good change. It adds some complexity to the ranged specialty, which has always needed some sort of spice to change it up. Combat in this game does feel similarly fluid to Fable 2. It takes a similar stance to that game and sees you jump back and forth between enemies, blasting away, slashing at bodies, and casting spells. One of the really interesting things that's been changed is the fighting style. Frequently, if you're shooting or slashing in another direction than the one your character is facing, they'll slash behind them or throw their gun over their shoulder and shoot behind their own back, which is just undeniably badass. The combat feels good, but overall, towards the end, it ends up degrading into a will fest, repeatedly charging will spells and using the same attacks over and over again. This relic chamber is designed very well, though, I have to say, albeit a little long. I did enjoy going off the beaten path and trying to find extra items, even if they didn't feel very worth it most of the time, a common problem with these games. Reaching the final chamber, I find an item that we are familiar with, the music box. When we find it, Teresa summons us back to the road to rule, the long road filled with gates that we must open. Attaining the music box has proven to Teresa that I am truly a hero. We see a vision through the box of what Logan is planning.
Cities will bow to my law, or they will burn. Its mountains will bend to my will, or they will fall. This is my Albion. Its people will do as I say, or they will die.
Logan vows to see Albion destroyed before he surrenders it to another. This shows us what our movement is about, why we truly need a revolution. We need to gain our first ally, but before that, we're allowed to open our first gate on the road to rule. The road to rule is an interesting system, an extension of the ridding of the user interfaces common in RPGs and the previous games in the series. This basically acts as our skill upgrade screen. We're allowed to use our experience to open chests and upgrade our melee, ranged, or will abilities. We can also unlock new spells with experience. This isn't anything entirely new from what we've been seeing, just an extension of the crusade against menus in Fable 3. But there's more. Just about everything is also locked behind the road to rule. Not only are combat upgrades locked behind this, but interaction upgrades, property ownership, buying businesses, having children, having a wife, leveling up your job skills, everything that makes Fable interesting. Interaction has been completely revamped and whittled down as well. If you want to approach a villager and interact with them, you have to enter into an interaction submenu. This will give you one good and one bad option to choose from. The game selects these options for you, not giving you the freedom to fart on random strangers if you'd like. All jokes aside, this really narrows down what you're allowed to do with interaction and doesn't give you the freedom that it once did. Funneling these choices into one good and one bad just forgets everything that made Fable special. That being said, if you want to make one of these Brightwall villagers your friend when you first enter the town, you aren't allowed. Fable blocks this option off through the Road to Rule. You must obtain more followers through the main quest, unlock more gates, and make your way through the Road to Rule. This whole design philosophy really narrows down variety in playthroughs and creates situations where you'll probably be having an incredibly similar experience to your friends that have also played the game. This changes a little bit towards the end of the game, where the chests become incredibly costly and you have to choose which ones you'd like to open, but this really doesn't happen until the last 2 roads are open. Experience has also been simplified, removing the interesting specialty experience system that I loved from the previous games. This is just funneled into one type of general experience. This goes towards filling up a bar that will give you a guild seal upon being filled. These guild seals are your experience, and they are used to open the chests on the Road to Rule. All of these choices sacrifice the choice of the previous games and the playthrough variety that made the first game so special. This creates a game that is much more accessible to consumers, but is not necessarily one that will be enjoyed by fans. If I can say one positive thing about the Road to Rule, it's that each time you open a gate, you see a statue of your likeness at the time of opening the gate. This lets you see what you looked like throughout the course of the game, which is an interesting concept, although there's really not an incentive or a time to ever go back through and look at your previous appearances. I chose to unlock most of the functional things on the Road to Rule first, like being able to buy property and interact with people. I also leveled up my melee ability because I assumed that's what I'd be using for most of the game. Interacting with people can be useful. Making friends will see them providing you with many gifts whenever they see you next. It's a bit of a tedious task though, because bringing them up from neutral to friends requires you to complete a fetch quest for them, usually in another town. This will set them on to the friend level, and then you can make them even better friends or lovers. I took a job to make some extra money, baking pies. Fable 3 returns the job system from the previous game with 3 options: Pie Maker, Loot Hero, and Blacksmith. These are all essentially the same mini-game, timing button presses, matching the colors on the screen. These mini-games work much better than Fable 2 because they don't have that strange lag that happens at a certain multiplier. They're a pretty good way of getting money early game, but become redundant about halfway through the game. We'll get to that in a bit. For now, we have to deal with our second task to gain Sabine's followership. Walter has us steal the mercenary clothes off of a drunken bandit and wants us to infiltrate their camp. Once I got there, I had one of the funniest exchanges I've ever had in a Fable game. The mercenaries inside think that you're Jimmy. One of them calls you over and says, "Jimmy, show this guy that thing you do." When you interact with him, you're allowed to pick the kiss option. The implication here is that the thing Jimmy does is kiss random people, which is hilarious. Not to mention the fact that this guy starts vomiting automatically once you do this. We venture through the camp and we're eventually spotted. I have to kill every mercenary in the camp and make my way to Saker, the leader. We have our first boss fight of the game, which is really just attacking the guy with a big HP pool and avoiding his slow attacks and ranged Molotovs. When he's defeated, I choose to let him live. I spare the mercenary's life, and we journey back into the Road to Rule. Here we see the effect that followers have. Every time we complete a new side quest or main quest, we gain a follower. These show up in the Road to Rule as these shade spirits. By the end of the game, this evolves into a menagerie of people that have supported us on our journey. With the option in the Road to Rule open, we've now gained the ability to own properties. This is an extremely integral part of the game and gaining gold at all. Buying properties works similarly to the previous games, except that we don't have to physically be there to complete the purchase. We can buy and manage them from the sanctuary table. We can change rent prices, business prices, and evict tenants. Adjusting the rent higher makes us more corrupt, just like the last game, and reducing them makes us more pure. Though this time around, we are not privy to those stats. There are a ton of properties in Fable 3, and later in the game, it will become a critical part of managing our income. Beginning our third task, Brightwall doesn't have an abundance of resources to give away to the dwellers. We need to improve things around the town first, before we can finish our job for the dwellers. We gain the ability to complete side quests around Brightwall. Side quests are done fantastically in Fable 3, for similar reasons as the previous game. They are self-contained narratives that play fast and loose with the stories they tell. They're mostly interesting, and some of the best side quests in the series show up in this game. The first one we'll complete is collecting a man's chickens by dressing up as one of their own and leading them back to the coop. At the end of the side quest, you have the option to have the man kill the chickens or save them. I decided to save them, and coming back to this area later sees the couple creating chicken races that you can bet on. Lambert and Pinch are standing outside of Brightwall Academy, and they want me to find a lost play by Philip Morley. He was one of the greatest playwrights in Albion, and his lost play decided to try and mix comedy and tragedy. I found this play sitting inside of the Academy, its haunted pages flipping and turning on their own. We get sucked inside of the play and meet Ransom Locke, one of Morley's most famous characters. We have to relive famous moments from Morley's old plays and reenact them. Morley's ghost sees this and allows us to use his lost play. On the outside, we give the play to Lambert and Pinch, who decide to perform it for the public.
Hark! Bear witness to the tragic futility that is man. Oh, how it doth sear my senses to see paradise and yet to be barred.
That reminds me of a great joke. A guard, a monk, and a chicken walk into a bar. Unfortunately, the bartender had had a mild heart attack that morning, so none of them get served.
It's not exactly great, and the crowd isn't impressed, but we got our guild seals. Doing these quests improves Brightwall's standing and allows them to provide the dwellers with food. Samuel, the librarian of the Brightwall Academy, asks us to do a favor in return for the town helping us. When I become king, he wants me to reinstate Brightwall Academy to its former glory. This is the first promise that we make in the game, and these come into play much later in the playthrough. Each of these promises that we make are contracts. They go on display in the sanctuary, placed there by Jasper. I'll talk about them more in a bit, but for now, we can return to the dwellers with their tasks completed. Sabine agrees to help us in our revolt against Logan, but requires that we restore the lands of Mistpeak and return them to the dwellers when we become king. This is our second promise of the game. At this point, we've unlocked more of the road to rule and can begin to see all of the people we've helped so far showing up on our path. I met a man in Brightwall, hidden in a marsh off of the beaten path. He's surrounded by garden gnomes, and he wants us to find a package for him. We find it, and it turns out to be a gargoyle head. When we bring it back to him, he completes an incantation that brings all of the gnomes to life, using the power funneled from the gargoyle head. I came back here later in the game, and all the gnomes had escaped, and the man wants me to find them. They're hidden throughout the world, and shooting them will return them to him. This is the successor to the gargoyle heads from Fable 2. The gnomes even insult me similarly to the gargoyles. I have similar feelings about this little quest as the gargoyles. It's an interesting collectible that was added, but the rewards generally aren't worth the time and effort of going after them. I do like the extra effort put into the quest line, though. One of the guards in Brightwall wanted me to apprehend a criminal that was roaming around town. Fable 3 has a really odd hand-holding system. You can hold hands with most characters in this game, and this is used in the prologue when you're heading to the castle with Lady Elise. This can also be used, obviously, when going out on dates with women, but it's also used when apprehending criminals or bringing traitors through dangerous areas. It's really odd to just hold a grown man's hand to guide him to his destination. Molyneux really harped on this idea and made it out to be one of immersion and bringing the player closer to the reality of the game, but I just found it kind of strange.
And we're giving you the ability to touch things. Now this may sound strange, but imagine this, being able to reach out and touch your girlfriend in the game. Being able to hold, persuade, pull, push, All that can be done dynamically.
I met Walter at the monorail station. We were going to head to other towns and meet leaders who would help us in our taking back of the throne. This plan is thwarted, though, as the monorail crashed when it enters the station. Walter and I rush below to help and find that the culprits of the crash are Hobbs, making their return for the third game. I found this area unnecessarily long, as I did most areas in Fable 3. It just seems to keep throwing the same enemies at you for a while as you travel across samey-looking caverns until you eventually reach an endpoint where you either fight a boss or a lot of enemies at once. There's really no ambition with the level design, trying to make things flow differently or have a unique atmosphere. Walter and I head out through the marshes and end up in Morningwood. Here we are to find an ally in Major Swift, the man that's leading the forces in the garrison there. Major Swift is facing a problem, though. The garrison is being swarmed with the undead, which happens during our conversation. The soldiers at this outpost are tired of Logan's rule because he doesn't provide resources, and he's switching them out for the elite soldiers from his own royal guard. We man one of the mortars to defend against the oncoming Hollow Men. This was pretty satisfying to do at first, but this section just goes on too long. Eventually, we leave the battlements as the Hollow Men have infiltrated the fort. We fight a large Hollow Man and destroy him before earning the soldiers' loyalty and promising Major Swift to return the armies to their former glory. Walter and I head through the marshes and make our way to Bowerstone Industrial. The entire city is now split up into 3 places. Industrial, a grimy and bleak area filled with smokestacks, production, and poverty. Market, a more proper area, burgeoning with economy, resources, and the more high society. And Castle, this is the King's high seat, the place of the top of Bowerstone's royalty, and the spot where court is held. There's another area of Bowerstone called Old Town, which we'll talk about more in a bit. Entering into the industrial area through the sewers, we're introduced to a character from the previous game, Reaver. He has now used his eternal youth to create an industry in Bowerstone. He uses his power to rule over the citizens with an iron fist, forcing them to return to work with the threat and use of a pistol.
The rules that will govern what I like to call the Reaver Team Spirit Award are these. Firstly, any worker that so much as murmurs another complaint will be shot.
Reaver has obviously completely gone off the rails here and has been totally taken over by greed and power. We saw tinges of this in the last game, but it definitely wasn't this full in force. Now he's virtually a tyrant gone mad, drunk with greedlust. Walter and I head into the sewers, where the head of the Bowerstone Resistance lies. We meet the leader of the Resistance, Paige, who wants me to prove myself by completing tasks helping the folks of Bowerstone out. This is another side quest block where we're forced to do some activities to gain the trust of a leader. This is a common thing that happens throughout the game and makes the side quests feel less unique and special. Most of the bigger side quests have a disproportionate amount of Guild Seal rewards for completing them. These are the obvious quests you would go for when looking to gain the amount necessary to complete the next main quest. This means that most playthroughs of the game are going to be very similar in what you end up experiencing. This is another design choice that leads to a lower variety in playthroughs. Though I can't complain too much because I'm about to gush about a couple side quests that are just very good. I made my way to some gentleman playing a tabletop RPG who needed a hero to participate. They use an artifact that shrinks me down to model size, and I become a player in their role-playing game. This whole ordeal sees the men narrating my experience in their game. It all acts as a meta-narrative for the actual developers of the game, Lionhead, to criticize reaction to their games a bit.
I can make you a magic sword. It's 1,000 gold per plus. So, a +3 sword is 3,000 gold. And I can't make anything more than a +3 because I'm only a journeyman blacksmith.
It works very well though, because there's a lot of TRPG cliches that come through here, and as an avid Dungeons & Dragons DM, I can entirely relate to this. We venture through the town talking to some cardboard stand-ins, voice acted by our hooded friends overlooking the table. We have to rescue the princess who has been captured by the evil Baron. We defeat some evil chickens in the Baron's elite guard before attacking the Baron himself and saving the princess. This whole final area, we can see the players overlooking the table from above, and it's just a fantastic sight. We're brought back to normal size, and the players thank us for our help. I helped a man named Laszlo, whose wife had been kidnapped by a local crime lord. The man has to pay some fees to the gang before he can get his wife back, but we're going to ensure that doesn't have to happen. I fight my way through the forces, eventually meeting the man himself, Nigel Ferret, but Laszlo's wife is hidden beneath the hideout. I have to venture down to save her, and the side effect of this is her falling in love with me.
Look, before we go back to Laszlo, I just want to say, you were amazing. I mean, you are amazing. I used to use the word when I was telling my friends about Laszlo. But next to you, he looks a bit boring now, doesn't he? Do I really want to spend my life with a man like that? What do you think?
She asks me if I want to be with her, and I tell her to stay with Laszlo. It just wouldn't feel right to take another man's wife. Upon returning, we find that Nigel has escaped and knocked out Laszlo in the process. My last side quest was helping a man get divorced. His wife is a shrew. She's become a woman he thought she never could be. He wants me to seduce her so that she'll divorce him and he won't have to lose half of his money. I do this, and when confronting the wife, she asks me to kill the man so that I can marry a wealthy widow. I decide to leave these two to their business and go on my way. All of these side quests are interesting. They've always been Lionhead's strong point. They flow incredibly well, and they insert Lionhead's own brand of humor, which is generally lighthearted and fun. Lionhead also decided to add another collectible to Fable III, books. You can pick various tomes up throughout the world of Albion and return them to their proper place in Brightwall Academy. This will eventually garner you rewards after so many have been collected, and it's incredibly interesting on its own to see this physical representation of the ones you've collected throughout the game. This is the place where I think Lionhead's in-world representation design philosophy comes through. While I don't think it works for things like inventory and gold, I do think it works very well for collectibles. Collectibles are things that you want to display and see physical representations of, and you're willing to sacrifice practicality to see these things. I'm not willing to sacrifice it for simple things like inventory. With all of these tasks completed, we've proven ourselves to Paige. I head to the Bowerstone Resistance. On the way, I see Major Swift, who tells us he's been infiltrating the Royal Army. He's trying to foment insurrection from within the ranks and create inside men. Another soldier we met at Morningwood is named Ben Finn. He's also working with the Resistance and will become one of our greatest allies. Paige has a new plan and has decided to infiltrate Reaver's mansion. He's been bleeding the city dry for a while now, and a group of soldiers went to his home but never returned. He's having a party, and Paige and I are going to dress the part, infiltrating his shindig. I met Paige in front of the manor and we headed inside, disguises in full force. Inside, Reaver is holding one of the soldiers in a cage, and he's using the same wheel that the Temple of Shadows used in Fable II. He uses this wheel to put us through the ringer, deciding randomly which enemies we are to fight. We fight Hobbs, Hollow Men, bandits, and finally a new enemy type, the Sand Furies. These enemies are fighters from the faraway land of Aurora. They are quick, agile, blocking or dodging most attacks, and can be pretty difficult to kill. But we're using the fully charged will AoE method, so I didn't have much trouble. In the end, we end up fighting Balverines as well, as Reaver's guests who are watching from above have grown tiresome. If we really boil it down, this area is extremely similar to the Arena, or the Crucible, or the Colosseum, and is just a reskin of that whole repeated deal. I don't love this idea being reused so much, but I didn't have a huge problem with it when I was playing, mostly because it was framed in a new and interesting way. Getting out of Reaver's mansion, Paige decides to give me her forces, but I have to promise to end the exploitation of the people of Bowerstone in return. On our way back into Bowerstone, Logan is holding a presentation. He has found a traitor in his midst, and it turns out to be Major Swift. The man is executed for his treason. Ben was his second in command, and the two of us return to the Resistance to marshal our forces and get vengeance for the Major's death. Our allies are still not strong enough yet, though, and there's only one place left to look for people: the distant land of Aurora. We need a ship to get there, though. Ben and I make our way through the docks, and with the help of Walter, we commandeer a vessel. On our way out of the city, we're attacked by a Bowerstone vessel, and we crash. I wake up on sandy shores, Walter shouting, trying to find Ben. He's nowhere to be found, though, so we head deeper into the continent. We've reached the shores of Aurora, a continent to the south of Albion. Aurora is largely empty, and with its arid lands, no exports to be known, there is only one known city in the uninhabitable place, a city named, quite uncreatively, Aurora. Walter and I head through some ruins that we find beneath the sandy dunes. Then there's an entrance that leads further below, but it's blocked by some magical force. We find a scroll on the ground, and the words open our path forward, closing after we enter. The temple is incredibly dark, our way only lit by a torch. As we get further into the ruined structure, we encounter a foul presence.
All that you are will die. The children are here to play.
Scores of shadow beasts attack us, narrated by a looming voice. We try to make our way out, but end up face to face with the head of these forces, the Crawler. This entire area is extremely atmospheric. The dank, dark halls of the temple, chased by the Crawler, his haunting voice only saying, "We are coming," over and over. This whole sequence does incredibly well to introduce these characters to us and their impending doom. We continue to slay scores of these shadows, but the Crawler binds Walter in the process. Journeying to the sanctuary at any point during this sequence will see the darkness infiltrating it, Jasper nowhere to be found. With Walter blinded, we have to lead him out of the temple, into the desert sands. We reach a certain point where we have to make a grave decision. We have to choose whether we want to keep moving forward with Walter or leave him behind. It's a hard choice because the path forward would be shorter, not having to carry him behind us the whole time. This choice ends up ultimately not mattering, though, because he gets left behind anyways. I decided to take him as far as I could, but I ventured to get help. The Crawler was showing me mirages, visions of Walter scorning me for leaving him behind. I had to fight a shadow of him and face his ridicule. I eventually collapse in the desert and am saved by the people of Aurora, and Ben, who is still alive. We meet Kaylin in the city of Aurora, who is the leader of her people. She leads us through the dead city, telling us about the Crawler. If you remember our history lesson from before, you'll know that the Crawler was brought in with the original building of the Spire in the Old Kingdom. The Crawler has now destroyed all of the other cities on the continent of Aurora and has been attacking this city daily for a while. Callan also says that Logan knows of this threat, that he came to Aurora years ago, and the Crawler told him that he would attack Albion after finishing with Aurora. This forced Logan to become a tyrant, collecting enough money to be able to marshal forces and protection for the lands of Albion once the Crawler did come from them, abandoning Aurora in the process. I promised to rebuild Aurora and protect its people, in return for the loyalty of Callan and her people. Her people got rid of Walter's blindness and brought him back from the brink. After this, we head back to Albion, and all of the leaders gather. Sabine, Paige, Ben, Callan, Walter, and me. We marshal our forces and begin our assault on the castle. We make our way through Bowerstone, destroying the royal guard and the forces of the king. We make it to the king's chambers, and Logan tries to explain himself, but is swept away by Walter. This defeat makes me officially King of Albion. The castle is ours, the crown is ours, and the responsibility is ours. Now you might think that's the end. Maybe I'll talk about some DLC and we'll move on to the bad playthrough, but that's just the first half of the game. The first half of what Fable 3 has to offer. You see, this is the big turn and change that Fable 3 really takes, and it's the whole point of what Lionhead wanted to do with this game. From here on out, we're the king, and we have some important decisions to make, but we have to make these decisions within a time constraint. The crawler is coming. That's the real threat now, and we have 1 year to prepare. We need 6.5 million gold in Albion's treasury before the year is up to be able to afford the defenses to ensure no civilians are killed during the attack. For every gold that we are under this amount, 1 civilian casualty is expected. We're still free to roam, complete side quests, and do everything we did before, but we'll always have a royal task list. These are things we must complete before we time skip ahead a month or so. These tasks are usually hearing proposals from the people of Albion and giving our ruling. These choices are similar to all the other ones in this game, a very clear good and a very clear bad choice, though this time there's real consequences for each choice. Take, for example, the first choice we're forced to make by Hobson, our new financial advisor. Logan had incredibly high taxes throughout his rule. We can lower these, taking 400,000 gold out of the kingdom's treasury, or raise the taxes, giving the kingdom 200,000 gold. We can also just keep the current tax rate, which won't do anything to the treasury, but won't sit well with my popularity as king. I choose to lower the rate, and as this was my good playthrough, I generally took the good option every time, costing me a lot of money. Just about every choice you make in the throne room that's morally right costs the treasury money, and this forces the player to have to compensate for this by providing their own funds to the treasury. This whole switch in gameplay is honestly an incredible one, and it was a change that was unexpected and loved by me. I didn't expect this either, because starting the game out, all I could see was more narrowing down and appealing to wider audiences by Lionhead. But once I got to this point, I realized that they were actually taking a great risk with this new style. It was all in service of delivering the concept of the weight of the crown. But it's one that is so well done and so interesting. Making good moral choices hurts the kingdom's finances, which in turn hurts the people in the long run. But making poor moral decisions might make people hate you as a king, but also might hurt the people now only to try and save them in the long run. It's an incredibly interesting dynamic, and every choice made as king generally feels like there is something great at stake. The other thing that comes into play with these decisions is the promises you made when trying to take back the kingdom. The people you made these promises to will be coming back to make sure you fulfill them. These promises cost quite a bit of gold to fulfill, but as a good king, I knew I had to keep to them. The only thing I didn't really care for in this whole thing was Reaver. Every single decision you make generally has Reaver playing the devil's advocate against whatever proposal is being made, and it just seemed really weird to have the same character in there every single time speaking against the good decision. I felt like they could have switched him out a few times to divvy up the decisions, but he just kept showing up. Also, I hate Reaver's little e-girl face tattoo. Upon becoming king, you also gain the extreme morphing that we talked about in the development section. I was really excited for this feature when I did research, but it just felt so underwhelming. First of all, you only gain it this late in the game, so you're using it for a large portion of the game where you aren't even really fighting that much, so it doesn't get that much use. And it's also just not really that amazing. You get wings that sprout from your back when you do a flourish, and that's about it. It looks cool the first few times, but isn't this large overhaul of the morphing system that Molyneux was claiming it would be. Starting my rulership, I decided to spare Logan. I couldn't kill my own brother, and he clearly had his own reasons for ruling the kingdom as he did. I lowered the tax rates and decided to open a school in Bowerstone instead of reinstating child labor like Reaver wanted to do. When Paige asked, I decided to provide the money to rebuild the Old Quarter, a district of Bowerstone that had been long since abandoned, a neglected part of the city's history that had been lost to time. I decided to raise the guard budget, chose good decor for the castle, and kept my promise to the people of Aurora to rebuild the city and protect the people. Hobson sent me out on a mission to one of the Auroran caves to find a gem by the name of the Desert Star. This relic fetched quite the price, and I donated it to the treasury, bringing us out of debt for a short period of time. I restored the child benefit to the parents of the city, removed the drink limit, and destroyed Nigel Ferret's crime operations. I kept my promise to the people of Brightwall and rejected the proposal to mine Bower Lake. I found a wealthy noble in Millfields who wanted me to find her stolen statue. This turned into me tracking down a man who could turn into a white Balverine at will, and killing him to get the statue back. The wealthy noble donated this statue to the treasury. At this point, I was over 1 million gold in debt, and needed to find a way to make some money, because the Crawler and his forces were soon approaching. I headed out to quest across Albion and find some more ways of making money. I happened upon a demon door in Sunset House. These work very similar to previous games and still have that same charm as Fable II. They exist as these little dimensional pockets, strange areas with intriguing stories. This particular one gave me 1 million gold, a lot of what I needed for now. I wasn't done in this area though, because one of the most interesting places in the game was right there. Sunset House is a ghostly building with 2 versions of itself, the house as it once was and the decrepit, ruined building that it is. We have to solve an expression puzzle to get inside. Once we're in, we see a hanged skeleton in the lobby, and he tells us to not sleep in the bed upstairs, surrounded by fire. So, of course, we do. This puts us in a short game of chess with Chesty, our new mimic chest friend. We have to defeat his legions of chess pieces, and then he allows us free roam of the house. Venturing in the mirror of the home and solving its puzzles gives us a legendary weapon. This little area was just such a nice touch, short puzzles and interesting backstory. It was a fun little experience, and I wish the games would do more things like this. All this adventure was fun, but I had to find a way to come up with all of this money before the Crawler attacked, because I knew I had more choices to make, and this was going to cost me even more money in the end. This is where the realty management system came into play. I had amassed quite a few properties, but I started buying every single property in Albion. I increased the rent just to see what would happen, and just about everybody I interacted with hated me all of a sudden, even the people that I had become friends with previously. I bought just about every business and home in Albion, and in the end it afforded me enough money to funnel into the treasury, saving the people of Bowerstone. In my adventures, I met a woman, got married at the castle, and had a child. I kept my promise to Sabine and the Dwellers and built a desert fort in Aurora. Before I knew it, it was time. The darkness was coming, and we defended our home against the shadow beasts. This is kind of the inverse of the siege of Bowerstone. We're feeling the same thing Logan was feeling when we attacked. Pushing the forces back works for some time until the Crawler shows himself and possesses Walter.
Show yourself!
The lost sheep returns to the flock. No one ever leaves the darkness behind.
Do you see what you have allowed? We are all shadows now.
Our final battle of the story is against the possessed Walter. Defeating him is simple, but it wasn't something I wanted to do.
I'm sorry.
You took away the darkness. It's been inside me all this time. But it's light now. I can see the sky. And it's light. I don't think I can fight anymore.
It's all over, Walter. We won. We beat it together.
Do you remember the stories I tell you when you were a child? There was a great king once, the mightiest hero of them all. Remember what you would say.
Teach me to be a hero.
You've done me proud, boy. You've always done me proud.
Oh, Walter.
He doesn't survive the battle. We erected a statue of him in the gardens of the castle, and everyone was there to see its completion. There were 2 quest packs for Fable III. The first was Traitor's Keep. Bored with the duties of being king, our hero is falling asleep when Hobson is reading the kingdom's finances to him. It's at this point that an assassin from a foreign land attacks. A ship approaches the keep, Commander Milton on board. He says he comes from an island off the coast of Albion, and he believes the assassin was one of his prisoners. We head to Traitor's Keep, a secret prison for the worst criminals in Albion. When Milton was gone, a riot has broken out, and the prisoners have taken over the keep. We take it back from them, and Milton tells us of the 3 prisoners that were behind this. We have to take them down one by one. The first is Professor Faraday. Faraday has his own island that was a mechanical amusement park that he built himself. The man was responsible for many of the technological advancements in Albion, like the monorail. We learn through exploring the island that Faraday was brought to see Logan after he was impressed with the man's inventions. He wanted Faraday to build him an army of machines, and Faraday refused, so he was imprisoned. Upon fighting Faraday in an Iron Man-like steampunk suit, we're allowed to spare or kill him, and I can't help but feel sorry for the man. Each of these characters in the DLC are well developed and interesting. They have their own backstory and unique characteristics. They're all themed around something, and it feels like a good showcase for the characters of this world. The DLC in its entirety kind of reminds me of Arkham Asylum, prisoners broken out and causing mayhem throughout the world. The next prisoner is Witchcraft Mary, who calls the menagerie her home. She's a witch, and she has a zoo of sorts on her island. You see different exhibits with interesting species, like exploding rabbits. I was hoping that we'd fight some more interesting animals on the island, but we really just fight more Balverines and variations of Hollow Men and Hobbs that multiply when killed. Witchcraft Mary hopes to become more than human, and before fighting her, she drinks a potion that transforms her into Hobbs, Balverines, and Hollow Men. When she's defeated, we have the same choice, and I send her to an institution where she can get the help she needs. When we return to the keep to get information on the final prisoner, General Milton is knocked out. He says that the whole ordeal was led by General Turner, a prisoner in Ravenscar Keep, and he's been hiding in the prison the whole time. He's taken out Hobson, and we go to find him alone as Milton is injured. When we find Hobson, he's tied to one of the electrical chairs, and he tries to warn us before we're attacked, but I'm knocked out and placed in the other chair. When I wake up, Milton is there, and he tells me that Turner was dead all along. He was the one orchestrating the riot and release of the prisoners. He wants to carry on Turner's legacy, and I thought this twist was pretty good. It definitely caught me off guard, although I think if I look any more closely at it, it would probably crumble and not make much sense. Milton funnels my energy into a potion and drinks it, turning himself into a mirror of my power. My dog tries to attack Milton, but he hits him with a fireball, and I decide to stand up for the dog, for once.
Leave my dog alone.
The final battle of the DLC is myself. I'm not really going to go into the Understone quest pack very much. It was basically one quest where you find a city that exists under Bowerstone. You're allowed to decide the fate of the people in this city, and there's also 2 additional quests, the Wheel of Misfortune and the Shooting Range. These are just open-ended things that you can keep yourself busy with. I didn't really care for this DLC. I genuinely liked Fable 3 a lot more than I thought. It has serious issues, that's for sure. As an RPG, this game is terrible, as most of the elements that represent that genre have been removed. It's definitely a far cry from the first game, but this game isn't an RPG. Accepting that fact makes this pill of a game a lot easier to swallow. This is an action-adventure game through and through, and when looking at it through that lens, it's actually a pretty damn good and ambitious one. I still don't love a lot of what this game does, stripping back the leveling elements, making everything immersive and in-world with the Sanctuary and Road to Rule, reducing interactions to 2 options that have been chosen for you by the game. But the twist that Fable 3 presents in the middle of the game, turning everything you expected on your head, is a really ambitious risk that, at the very least, you have to respect. Before we get to final thoughts, I'd like to talk about my Evil playthrough, as I had a much better time with this one than Fable 2. Also, if you haven't noticed yet, Fable 3 removed titles entirely, which was another decision I didn't really care for, forcing me to refer to my heroes by vague names. I began my second playthrough. I woke up in the castle and chose the practical outfit, finding Elise and giving the kitchen staff a harsh speech. I learned that some of the bad options in this game can be pretty comical and go way over the top. I decided to insult the petitioner. I didn't want to get on my brother's bad side by putting my name next to something like that. But my character decided to rip the petition out of his hands and throw it on the ground. I went to the war room and Logan made me make a decision. I decided to execute the protesters. They shouldn't have been there in the first place, and I couldn't sacrifice Elise. She was too precious to me. Logan still couldn't get away for doing that to me. I left with Walter and Jasper, claimed the guild seal, and made my way through the caves. I talked to Sabine and decided to gain his favor. I made my way to Brightwall and took the puzzle box. I killed all of the mercenaries, and I fought Saker. I killed him. He and his people had been killing innocent dwellers for years. He didn't deserve to go on. I helped Brightwall and made a promise to restore the academy. I also made a promise to help the dwellers in exchange for Sabine's support. Walter and I went to the monorail and slashed through armies of Hobbs. We defended Morningwood, and I promised Major Swift to restore the Old Guard. I made it to Bowerstone and had to prove myself to the Resistance. Doing quests around the city, I found an interesting difference. When I helped Laszlo get his wife back, his wife turned out to be none other than Elise. It's not that this quest doesn't work on the good playthrough, but it just works much better here. I was worried after saving her that the choice would really have no effect on the game overall, but it did. I told Elise to leave Laszlo and be with me. I proved myself to the Resistance. During this whole playthrough, I was buying as much property as I could and raising the prices to the highest. This got me a lot of money pretty early on in the game, though the people of Albion weren't happy with me. I went to Reaver's Manor with Paige, fought the legions of enemies, and made a promise to restore Bowerstone and help the people. Major Swift was executed in public. We left and went to Aurora, encountering the Crawler in the tombs. I was forced to leave Walter in the desert. He would just slow me down. That much was clear. He still made it in the end, and I made a promise to Colin to help her people. We made our final assault on the throne, and I took it back for myself. When my brother told me about why he chose to be the kind of king he was, I realized what was at stake. I still had to execute him. The king could not have a past tyrant living to undermine him. It just wasn't possible, and he needed to pay for what he did. It was my time now. I needed a lot of gold, though, and some of that would come from my personal realty operation, which was already doing quite well. I wouldn't be able to provide all of the funds, though, and the treasury was virtually in ruin. I raised the taxes and reinstated child labor. The people wouldn't like it, but it would help the city out greatly. I decided not to rebuild the old quarter. It was ruined, and we had an eldritch threat on the way. This was not the time to be digging through the past. I lowered the guard budget to gain some more money. I chose evil decor. This was such an odd choice to throw in here. As you can see, most of these choices have justifications for both sides, and the incentive here isn't just to gain gold or power for yourself, but a genuine, realistic justification for someone doing evil things, to save the kingdom. This evil king does the things he does because he wants to prevent casualty. He believes that what he is doing is right in the long run, and it actually could be in certain circumstances. Now, this is the way to do a split morality game. There are genuine and enticing reasons to pick the evil option. It's not this comical caricature of a villain or an evil person. It's a realistic portrayal. But why would anyone pick evil decor? This is just so odd, and they don't even try to mask it by calling it bright decor and dark decor, just evil and good. Callan wanted me to keep the promise I made to her to rebuild Aurora, but I couldn't. It was 700,000 gold, and I could just reopen the mine and gain 500,000 gold for the kingdom. She of all people should understand what is at stake here. I broke my promise to her. I collected the Desert Star and instituted a child tax. Paige wanted to renovate the Bowerstone orphanage, but I had to turn it into a brothel. It would bring too much money to the kingdom to not do it. Reaver was right. I flooded Morningwood over building a sewage plant. The treasury wasn't ready for the attack yet, and we couldn't afford to spend any extra money. I cornered Nigel Ferret and took the bribe. The money could go towards the preparation. I outlawed alcohol and charged tuition to go to Brightwall Academy. Our treasury was starting to look up, but it still wasn't enough. I drained Bower Lake and helped the Balverines attack Silver Pines. I let the economy collapse because we couldn't afford bailouts, and I rejected the proposal to provide military protection to Aurora. And finally, I deforested Mist Peak. We gained some more money for the final siege, but it left the people of Mist Peak destitute. The day arrived, and the darkness came flooding into the city. I fought the Crawler in Walter, and he died. We had casualties, Walter among them, but the city was safe. I did what I had to do. I protected these people. They were my people, and this was my city, my Albion. If they had to hate me for me to save them, then so be it. Fable 3's variety in playthroughs isn't insane, but both playthroughs were virtually similar for the first half of the game. The choices that you do make on the throne, though, are difficult ones, and you want to be a good king, but being a good king means protecting your people. The choices that the game presents you with don't go down easy, they require thought. Playing through both sides provides something similar to the first game in the series, the same story viewed through two different lenses. You're making good choices because they feel right, and you're making evil choices because you have to, because the ends justify the means. This is what this is all about. Looking back on your playthrough and seeing what you feel good about doing, was it all worth it? Honestly, I went into Fable 3 with low expectations, and the first half of the playthrough definitely didn't do a lot to raise those expectations up. But by the end, I genuinely felt like I had experienced something different. A game that, although had strayed very far from its RPG origins, had branched out and tried to do something different and interesting. Fable 3 takes risks and tries to work outside of the box that it's put itself in. It's not a good RPG by any means, but it's an interesting action-adventure game with genuine morality and questions to be asked. I overall enjoyed my time with Fable 3. It was incredibly interesting and overall a great time. It has some weak points, and I felt that the general stripping down of mechanics into their simplest form made those mechanics less interesting. But the risks that the game does take are very well done. And even when they fail, you feel the need to respect the ambition in the process. Fable 3 was received to generally positive critical reception. Reviewers praised the game for its ambition, but criticized its slow start. The game would sell okay, Molyneux stating that it needed to sell 5 million copies, and some predictions putting it around there. But that would not be the end for the Fable series. After 3 games that had some amazing and also rocky moments, the series as a whole would stumble and falter for the next decade. We're going to dive deep into Fable's failings next time. Thanks again. Bye, Dad. Hey Dad, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate the support so much, and I'm so glad everyone is loving the Fable series. The full retrospective should be out in a week, which will include Part 4, Fable's Failings, which will dive into Fable the Journey, Fable Fortune, Fable Legends, the Fable books, and we'll be talking to some members of the community about Fable. If you want to support the channel, you can do so over on Patreon, where I provide updates and, eventually, exclusive content. You can also follow me on Twitter and keep an eye on the channel for my streams. The link for all of that is in the description. Thanks again for watching, Dad. See you soon.